Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We got a wrap up for season 6 of Rick and Morty, and some gameplay so far on High on Life, which is basically a Rick and Morty video game. So the first episode that we got to cover is the fantasy of Rick and King Mortar's Mort. Morty is just randomly given a sword by these mystical magic knights and winds up having to join a night cult. Hijinks ensues. Morty really starts to regret not listening to Rick, and just basic Rick I told you so moments, but Rick being a lot more healthy about it, which we'll find out later why. If I was to compare it to any other episode of Rick and Morty, it just has the same vibe as the earlier episode where we got King Jellybean, where Morty got to choose an adventure and he wanted to go to a fantasy world, and it wound up really biting him in the butt. This episode hits a lot of those same notes, but in a way, it's kind of tired because we basically already seen this kind of thing. There's some parodies of the Green Lanterns again, as a galactic police force. Uh, we get a lot of parodies of Game of Thrones and how everybody's kind of at each other's throats, betraying each other, stabbing each other in the back left and right, and it's just an all-out war when the power vacuum is released by the death of the King of the Sun, basically, and that the Knights of the Sun give up their duties. I don't know if it's just because I've gotten older and I just don't find it as amusing to joke about something like this, but I really didn't care for the Knights of the Sun becoming addicted to heroin because it wasn't funny enough to be worth mocking such a serious thing and then giving it no consequences because they're basically immortal, so they're not going to really suffer any consequences for doing it. All in all, it was a pretty solid episode, but it really came across as them hearing, like they mentioned earlier in the season, the feedback. Why don't you do some classic Rick and Morty adventures like season 1? And them literally basically doing an exact episode. The plot, more or less, is the exact same as a season 1 episode. And trying to show how tired and contrived that actually comes across when they don't actually care about what they're telling as a story. Alright, and then the next episode, the last episode of the season, kicks off with Rick getting these heartfelt, especially for Rick, presents for everybody for Christmas. And, it's Christmas time right now, so I feel like this episode hit at just the right time. But episode kind of ticks me off a little bit. So we open up and Rick's being all nice and sweet and everything. So something's up, right? And then it turns out that the whole time, pretty much since the beginning of the previous episode, Rick had replaced himself with a robot and actually has been obsessed about finding Rick Prime this whole time. So all this character growth that we thought we were getting throughout the season of Rick learning to let go and move on and care about his new family and let his quest for revenge go, he just completely backslid on it. Unapologetic, he went full Ahab from Moby Dick. They just made him go crazy, and he is obsessed with finding Rick Prime. In fact, we get some really good, deep character moments with Rick in this episode, but it's not with our Rick, with Rick that we know. It's with Robot Rick, who becomes a much better version of Rick in every way. It's kind of ironic that in order for Rick to get a heart, he has to become a man without one. Robo Rick even tries to modestly give Rick the credit for his own compassion because he claims that he wouldn't have been able to feel as much compassion for his family as Rick does if it wasn't for the fact that he made him to do that. Therefore, deep inside of Rick, he still cares. Almost like Rick took all of his passion about moving on and put it into this robot. Almost like how he did with the Toxic episode where they purged their toxicness. It's almost like Rick saw his compassion and his desire to move on and to live a healthy life with his new family as toxic and channeled it into a robot that could be there for them so that he could dive into what his actual toxic behavior is of being obsessed with revenge. Now, I don't necessarily dislike the idea of Rick getting revenge. I was really enjoying, and I really thought the show was going to go in a different direction where they were just going to like maybe really subvert our expectations and just like kill Rick Prime off in like a meaningless way. That way, the story is more about Rick growing as a person than about getting revenge in some kind of like Marvel movie style revenge quest, which Rick and Morty mocks all the time. And it seems like they're actually flipping it completely and doing exactly that. Honestly, I really liked this episode. I felt like it was really cool, and it talked about the coolest part of Star Wars, which is lightsabers are badass. Like, that's the best part of Star Wars. It's just the lightsabers. Everybody likes lightsabers. Even Star Trek fans like lightsabers. Unfortunately, I'm just not very happy with how it ended. I didn't like that Rick, the real Rick, backslid so hard and has become so obsessed. I kind of want them to like take it back a notch once the first episode of season 7 comes out. But at the same time, as somebody who likes the serialized content of Rick and Morty, and felt kind of like they didn't really do enough with like Tammy and the New Empire and stuff, it is kind of nice knowing that like we're finally going to get like a good serialized story again, even if I felt like the narrative was leading away from it. But that's it for that episode, and that's a wrap up. Again, I want to thank everybody who's started watching the channel. Anybody new, anybody who just popped in for this video, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll try to put out some gameplay of High on Life and show you what I've been playing, get some feedback on that. I've been having a lot of trouble with like microphone issues, so I'm trying to work on that right now. And whatever holiday you celebrate, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever, all of them, happy holidays. And here's to a new year. Thank you for watching.